Good to see you guys. Hello, hello. While we're getting set up here, just want to give you guys a couple prompts. I'm enjoying the real Seattle weather. We are truly ending the near of Seattle, and so why don't you turn to your neighbor and just share with them how you are squeezing out the last drops of Seattle summer, all right? And then if you're with someone new, you can catch them up to date on Nehemiah. You can tell them what Nehemiah is about. I've been summarizing it every time. I'm a little tired of summarizing it, so you guys do it, because you've heard me do it 4 times. So how you're squeezing out summer, and then if you're sitting next to someone new, just give them a brief update on what's the story of Nehemiah. All right, go and do that while I get set up. All right. Good energy. Oh. Okay, let's come back. If you guys are new, as always, most of the time, vast majority of the time, we will have a message handout that goes with the message, and it'll be on the music stand. And so, if you want to grab one right now, totally feel free to do that. This is how I have been squeezing out my last few drops of Seattle summer. This past Monday, Labor Day, got to go kayaking with some people on South Lake Union all the way to Lake Washington. It's my daughter, the one in the front, not the one in the back. My daughter Brooke, she fell asleep on the kayaking, so that was funny. We got to go kayaking, and then yesterday, Martin, who's one of our Philly students visiting, we took him to go to the new Overlook Walk. It's not that new, but it's been like 15 years in the making. They had their grand opening yesterday, so we went, and there's this beautiful, over the aquarium, there's this nice seating area now and stuff. So that's me taking in my last few drops of Seattle summer and bracing myself for the big dark, right? Is that what it's called, the big dark? Yeah, it's like the void. Is that what it's called? No, but that's not just fall, winter. It's just called winter. All right. All right, well, in the past month, we've been studying the book of Nehemiah, about a Jew in mid-century 400 BC who commits his life to rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem. And remarkably, he leads an effort to build this wall that's 10 feet deep, 30 feet tall, 2.5 miles long, and he rebuilds it in 52 days. And not only does he rebuild the wall, in the process, he starts rebuilding God's people, literally gathering them together, but also shaping their values and starting to center their lives around God, because it was the loss of that led to the destruction of Jerusalem. And last week, we looked at Nehemiah 3 and 4, and we asked ourselves, what does it take to rebuild? What does it take? And we talked about how that's a very relevant question for us today, because when we look at our world, when we look at our generation, we're a lot like these broken down walls. We're a lot like these Jerusalem ruins. You look at our world, our generation has been fed the world's lies that when you live completely for yourself, for your own pleasures or desires, when you're living just completely maximizing your own potential, that's what leads to fulfillment. And I think more and more people are realizing that we've discovered as a generation that that's not true. When you live that way, it leads you to isolation. It leads to greater emptiness. It leaves us vulnerable to those who would prey upon us with all the different technologies and forces that are out there now to sort of make us addicted, to make us anxious, to make us depressed. And so when God looks at our situation, when God looks at our generation, he sees the broken down condition. He sees the ruin, and in the language of the Bible, God sees a generation ruined by sin. And he calls us, if you are a follower of God, if you are a Christian, he calls us, like Nehemiah, to join him in restoring what sin has ruined. To not rebuild walls, but to rebuild broken people. And so what does it take to rebuild a generation ruined by sin? We're going to revisit this question today, and we're going to look at Nehemiah 5. And I think Nehemiah 5 has very special lessons for what it takes to rebuild. Because in Nehemiah 5, something happens that actually stops the work. Nothing else in Nehemiah stops the work. 52 days straight, they're building. There's only one thing that stops the work, and it's what we read in Nehemiah 5. And so let's start reading. I'll read. You guys can follow along. We're going to read the first 4 verses, and then I'll pause there. So it says, "Now there arose a great outcry of the people and of their wives against their Jewish brothers. For there were those who said, 'With our sons and daughters we are many. So let us get grain that we may eat and keep alive.' There were also those who said, 'We are mortgaging our fields, our vineyards, and our houses to get grain because of the famine.' And there were those who said, 'We have borrowed money for the king's tax on our fields and our vineyards.'" So I think what we see from these first 4 verses is that what it takes to rebuild a generation ruined by sin is that it takes everyone's sacrifice. It takes real, costly sacrifice to rebuild a generation ruined by sin. And that's what we see in Nehemiah. These 4 verses shed light for us on how tough the builders actually had it. They were building night and day. They were working on the wall nonstop. And they didn't have a sabbatical. They didn't have PTO. They were still farmers. They were still goldsmiths. They were still they still had their occupations. And so they're trying to build the wall night and day while working their daytime jobs, trying to provide for their families. And you can imagine they probably weren't able to farm as well as they could have, and so they're not producing as much crops as they could produce. On top of that, there's a famine. On top of that, there's a king in the Persian Empire who was levying heavy taxes. And so they had to mortgage their properties. They had to borrow loans to get food, to pay their taxes. This is a really tough situation. I think for some of us sitting here, we know what that's like. Because as you have joined God, as you yourself have committed to restoring a generation broken by sin, as you have committed yourself to be a rebuilder, you have also paid some costs. You have also had to sacrifice. And for some of you, that's landed you in some pretty tough situations. I know for some of you, that's meant pay cuts. That's meant moving away from friends and family to Seattle, moving from beautiful Southern California or Northern California where the sun is out way more often, right? And coming here. For some of you, you've dealt with unemployment. Some of you, that's meant parental disapproval, maybe even losing some friendships as you have tried to commit yourself to this kind of life. And for some of you, you're in a perfect storm right now. You're like experiencing all of that all at once, and it's hitting you all at once. And on top of that, maybe you have health issues, and you have kids, and you have other burdens. Like it's all just hitting. And if that's you, I just want to remind you that Jesus never said following him would be easy. Jesus never promised it would be easy. In fact, Jesus said quite the opposite. Jesus told his followers, count the cost. Jesus told his followers, right, that the world, your friends, your family, some of them are going to hate you for following me, right? Jesus told us that following him would require daily self-denial, taking up our cross and following him. Right? Jesus never said it was going to be easy. But I also want to encourage us today because Jesus promised that he would see, that he would be with us and that he sees. God sees your sacrifice. God sees the cost that you pay. In verses 14 and 19, jumping to the end, Nehemiah is listing all these sacrifices he had to make in his commitment to rebuilding the wall. He says, "Moreover, from the time that I was appointed to be their governor in the land of Judah, from the 20th year to the 32nd year of Artaxerxes the king, 12 years, neither I nor my brothers ate the food allowance of the governor. The former governors who were before me laid heavy burdens on the people and took it from them for their daily ration, 40 shekels of silver. Even their servants lorded over the people. But I did not do so because of the fear of God. I also persevered in the work on this wall, and we acquired no land, and all my servants were gathered there for the work. Moreover, there were at my table 150 men, Jews and officials, besides those who came to us from the nations that were around us. Now what was prepared at my expense for each day was 1 ox, 6 choice sheep and birds, and every day, every 10 days, all kinds of wine in abundance. Yet for all this, I did not demand the food allowance of the governor, because the service was too heavy on this people. Remember for my good, oh my God, all that I had done for this people. I think the key phrase here is in verse 15. Nehemiah says, I did not do so. There were all these things that Nehemiah could have done, but he exercised self-restraint out of love for his brothers and sisters. And he made a tremendous sacrifice out of his commitment to them and to build this wall. And for some of you, that's where you have been. That's where you have lived for some of you many years now, exercising tremendous self-restraint. There are things that you could have done. There are promotions you could have taken. There are other more comfortable opportunities you could have done, things and you didn't. Why? Because of your commitment to being a rebuilder. And Nehemiah at the end, he says in verse 19, he says, remember for my good, oh my God, all I have done for this people. 6 times, Nehemiah prays this kind of prayer, this remember me structure prayer in the book of Nehemiah. And almost every time, the context in which he prays this prayer, it's a context where he's going the extra mile, where he is doing something completely thankless, especially sacrificial, out of this commitment. And when you read the book of Nehemiah, it's almost like those times take a little more out of Nehemiah. They force him to reach a little deeper because they're a little more costly, and he has to reach into his relationship with God, and he has to say, God, this one is really for you. Now, when you know that Nehemiah prayed this prayer 6 times in that context, and when you know that Nehemiah knows how difficult it's been for the wall builders, I think this puts another frame on Nehemiah chapter 3. You guys remember Nehemiah chapter 3? Nehemiah is listing all the names of the people who built the wall. Next to him, next to him, next to him. You remember that? Next to him, he built the dung gate. That's my favorite part. Next to him, Shalom. He and his daughters built. Right? And he's just listing all these people next to him. And I just imagine, again, as Nehemiah is writing this, each person's sacrifice is just so precious to Nehemiah. That they have all built the wall, that they have all sacrificed. Now, if Nehemiah is like that, how much more God, right? God sees your obedience. God sees your sacrifice, and it is precious to him. God sees it, and he'll remember it. And at the end of the day, when you stand before God, there will be a reward. He will say, well done, good and faithful servant. So, to be a rebuilder, first thing we see from Nehemiah 5 is that it takes everyone's sacrifice. Anything worth doing in life is going to take sacrifice. You just have to choose what you're going to sacrifice for. As Christians, we should be sacrificing for the mission of God, right? To join God in restoring what sin has ruined. That's also going to take sacrifice. But it wasn't the call to sacrifice that stopped the work. In the 52 days of repairing this wall, there was only one thing serious enough to cause everyone to stop. And we read about it in the next few verses, starting from verse 5. This is the Jewish people again. They say, now our flesh is as the flesh of our brothers. Our children are as their children. Yet we are forcing our sons and daughters to be slaves. And some of our daughters have already been enslaved, but it is not in our power to help it, for other men have our fields and our vineyards. Then Nehemiah, this is Nehemiah verse 6, I was very angry when I heard their outcry and these words. I took counsel with myself, and I brought charges against the nobles and the officials. I said to them, you are exacting interest, each from his brother. And I held a great assembly against them. So that's the part where the work stops. Nehemiah gathers everyone, right? Great assembly. And I said to them, we, as far as we are able, have bought back our Jewish brothers who have been sold to the nations, but you even sell your brothers that they may be sold to us. And they were silent and could not find a word to say. So this situation got really desperate, right? Like these poor got so poor that they had to default on their loans, and they're selling even their own kids into slavery to pay off their debts. But the shocking thing is that the people that they're selling their kids to and the people that they're defaulting their loans on are not like their enemies. It's their fellow countrymen. It's their brothers and sisters. It's flesh of my flesh. That's really jarring. That's really disorienting to read this, because when you're reading Nehemiah up to this point, it seems like everyone's working hard. Nehemiah chapter 4, the wall gets the halfway point everywhere, right? Nehemiah gets the halfway point. It just as it feels like, oh, wow, we might actually get this done. Everyone's high-fiving. Their morale is up. And then this gets revealed. How long has this been going on? What's been going on? You can imagine people's shock finding this out. Hear stories of immigrant families come to America. Everyone has to take on a blue-collar job, hard manual labor, delivery guy, seamstress, like whatever it might be. And then this immigrant families, like a bunch of them, uncle, auntie, like 3 families, 4 families, they pool all their money together, right? It's something they often do. They pool all their money together, and they say, this pool of money, we're going to use this to like put so-and-so through college so that they can make a better life for all of us. Or we're gonna pool all this money and we're gonna put it into some big property, some equipment for a business, right? And that's gonna take the business to the next level. Or they say, hey, we're gonna pool this and then we're gonna get a home, get some wealth, some equity, right? Then tragically, sometimes those stories ends with some uncle, like the guy who's managing the money. He's slowly siphoning off the money, and then suddenly he takes the money and just runs. It's so tragic. And, if you could imagine, and maybe you don't have to imagine, maybe you yourself experienced that in your own story. Like the experience of that is like, I'm living in one world where it's the world of family, and it's the world where we look out for each other, and it's the world of love, and it's the world of unity, and we sacrifice for each other. We're committed to each other, and then suddenly it turns out that world doesn't exist. Suddenly it turns out that the world that does exist is the world where you can't trust anyone. It's the world where you have to look out for yourself. It's the world where you have to make sure no one takes advantage of you. And I imagine that's something of what happened in Nehemiah 5. The Israelites discovered that there were 2 worlds they were living in. One world is the world of rebuilding God's wall. It's a world where everyone, because they're bought into God's vision, everyone is contributing, everyone has courage, everyone is watching out for each other's backs. Hey, if they come and attack us, you come over here, you help me fight them off. I got a sword in one hand, I got a pickaxe in one hand. And then because of real sacrifice everyone is making, there's this real unity. There's this commitment to each other that gives them strength to keep doing this day after day after day. And that's one world. But then in Nehemiah 5, turns out there's this other world, and it's the world of money. Hard cash. It's the world where you need to feed your kids, you need to pay your taxes, you need to get a job. It's a world of practical realities. It's a world where every man is for himself. And there's no such thing as commitment or unity. There's no higher thing we're living for. And I think what we see in Nehemiah 5 is that these worlds can't coexist. These worlds are inherently in conflict. They contradict. And these 2 worlds will come into conflict. They will clash. And when they do, something will snap. Something will give. And maybe it won't happen right away. Maybe it takes some time for tension and contradiction to build. But sooner or later, there will be a reckoning. I think what we see in Nehemiah 5 is something that all Christians experience. To be Christian is to live in a world where, to live a life where these 2 worlds are going to clash and contradict. And when those 2 worlds clash and contradict for you, or for us, the question for us is, which world will you live in? Are you going to live in the world of God's vision and rebuilding God's walls? Or are you going to live in the world of hard practical realities and needing to take care of myself? I see a lot of Christians today thinking they can have both. And they defer the choice. They don't make a clear stance where they're going to live. And they think everything's going fine, but then soon enough the reckoning comes. Again, going back to my experience growing up in immigrant community, grew up in an immigrant church, ethnic church, where a lot of times what was spoken on stage was, let's live for God. But what people were really living for in real life was the American dream, right? And as a teenager, I could see it clearly. And I remember, on stage, it's like, follow God, sacrifice, everyone, let's do this together. No. But the whole time, there's this other world that the teenagers and the moms and dads, everyone's living in. Hey, go be more like this guy. Did you hear this guy got into this school? Oh, did you hear this guy's got this job? He's making this kind of money. Like, do this, right? And there's like 2 worlds happening. And for the longest time, it was like people didn't see the contradiction in it. Went off to college and got involved with our church and then, started growing my faith. And soon enough, some of these kids from my home church started coming to our college. And I was so excited to bring them to our church. Hey, come, grow in your faith. No. Every single kid that came from my home church stop going to church. I remember I was so heartbroken. Each person is just like, I don't think I'm actually a Christian. I remember one of them straight up told his dad, like, I don't know anything about being a Christian. But what you have taught me is how to chase my career. What you have taught me is how to make money. But I haven't really learned very much about what it means to live for Jesus. Right? And I remember just thinking, oh my goodness, like these two worlds coming into conflict. This is what happens when Christians think they can have both. And you don't make a clear stance. Man, if you don't make a clear stance, when those two worlds collide, most of the time, it's the world of self-preservation, money, and practical realities that's going to win. So Nehemiah 5, the reckoning comes for Nehemiah and his builders. And I think Nehemiah's response tells us what's required for rebuilding. In verse 6, Nehemiah, right, he's very angry. And just to note that, anger is not necessarily wrong, right? It's what you get angry about that's wrong. And it's not like Nehemiah gets angry and just sort of like goes around and, he's like beating everyone up. He probably has a cupbearer. He can like do some crazy jujitsu stuff. I don't know. No, he takes counsel with himself. He thinks about it. He brings charges, and it ends up being very productive, right? And in verse 6, he says to them, you are exacting interest, each from his brother. And this is kind of a weird thing. Like, if you don't know the background, you're just like, exacting, what are you talking about, right? But it comes from the OT Mosaic Law, and I want to take a look at it because I think there's so much of the heart that gets missed if you don't know the background. So in Leviticus 25, God commands the Israelites, take no interest from him or profit, the people that you lend to, but fear God, that your brother may live beside you. You shall not lend him your money at interest, nor give him your food for profit. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt to give you the land of Canaan and to be your God. If your brother becomes poor beside you and sells himself to you, you shall not make him serve as a slave. He shall be with you as a hired worker and as a sojourner. He shall serve with you until the year of the Jubilee. There's a special year called Jubilee where all the slaves go free, all the property that's been seized because the debt gets returned. And in verse 41, he says, then he shall go out from you, he and his children with him, and go back to his own clan and return to the possession of his fathers. For they are my servants, whom I brought out of the land of Egypt. They shall not be sold as slaves. You shall not rule over him ruthlessly, but shall fear your God. Earlier in the story of the Old Testament, in Exodus 22, it puts it this way, if you lend money to any of my people with you who is poor, you shall not be like a moneylender to him, and you shall not exact interest from him. If ever you take your neighbor's cloak in pledge, you shall return it to him before the sun goes down. You know how awkward that is? Someone pledges, you take it, and then like later, hey, here's your cloak back, But it says in verse 27, for that is his only covering, and it is his cloak for his body. In what else shall he sleep? And if he cries to me, I will hear, for I am compassionate. So what's going on here? If you think about it, these commandments are not very practical. They don't make economic sense. Don't lend on interest. That's kind of the point, God. Free a slave, but he didn't pay back the debt. Give him back the cloak. He pledged the cloak to me. But if you read the Mosaic Law, oftentimes God's commandments, it's not about, it demands God's people to set aside the economic, sensible things and to do the counterintuitive thing. One of my favorite ones is, if you see your enemy's ox, don't leave it in a ditch, right? If it's lost and in a ditch, don't leave it alone. Rescue it and bring it back to your enemy. He's like, really, God? Like, I don't want to, what? I hate that guy, Why does God command these things? Is it just to be nice? No, it's way deeper than that. It's because God is trying to form and forge a people who do not live dominated by practical realities, who do not bow down to the God of money, but who instead bow down and fear him. See, those who bow down to the God of money, those who bow down to practical realities, inevitably get into betrayal of each other, right? They go back on their commitments to each other. Inevitably, it leads to fear and paranoia and isolation from one another. And God said, no, fear me, trust in me, the one who freed you from slavery, the one who has compassion. Don't bow down to those things. When you have your neighbor's cloak, just give it back to him, and don't leave your enemy's ox in the ditch. And God is saying these things because he's trying to forge a people who are going to look at that kind of nation, who are going to look at those kind of people and say, whoa, what is going on with that group of people? That group of people is different. That group of people is close. They take care of each other. If you go poor in that country, you're fine. You're loved. You're taken care of. Like, what is going on? And the whole purpose was that Israel would be this nation that would be a light to the rest of the nations. That if they actually lived out God's commands, other nations would look at them and say, who has such good and wise laws? In a world where people bowed down to the gods of power and money and were selfish as a result, the hope was that Israel would be a light, that with God at the center, a different life is possible, a different life where everyone is family. When you realize that larger context, these commandments go from bad economic policy to becoming very wise and a beautiful way of life, a beautiful arrangement of life. Now, unfortunately, Israel failed. They never celebrated a year of Jubilee, ever. But thousands of years later, God's people in the New Testament were able to live it out. And you guys know this passage. And they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and the fellowship, to the breaking of bread and the prayers. And awe came upon every soul, and many wonders and signs were being done through the apostles. And all who believed were together and had all things in common. And they were selling their possessions and belongings and distributing the proceeds to all as any had need. And day by day, attending the temple together and breaking bread in their homes, they received their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having favor with all the people. And the Lord added to their number day by day those who were being saved. When we read this beloved passage, the first thing that hits us is that, wow, these people are close, right? It's a beautiful community. But underneath that, what we're seeing is we're seeing a group of people who will not bow down to the God of money, who will not bow down to the God of practical realities, who will not bow down to the anxious drive of living and protecting and securing for yourself, who instead fear God, view each other as fellow sinners, brothers and sisters, saved by grace, and actually treat each other as family. What we're seeing is a group of people who are contributing, who are taking courage, who are sacrificing to being a group of people who are going to rebuild broken generation, a generation broken by sin. And when that happens, that's when we get this beautiful community that is a powerful, authenticating testimony to the power of the gospel. When you see this, it's like, wow, the gospel actually works. The word of God is not just theory. It's actually possible to live this out. And I remember experiencing this when I came to our church as a freshman. I remember walking into my leader's house for dinner. It's like, where's your TV? I said, oh, I don't have one. Too busy hanging out with people and doing ministry. I don't have a TV. I remember hearing about people who took hits in their career, people who made six-figure salaries but lived very simply. You couldn't tell. People were engaged in ministry. I remember these senior guys spending all kinds of time with me and just wondering why would you hang out with a freshman? What are you, and then I found out that all of them, decided to hold off on dating. And I was like, that's why you have so much time to hang out with me, and I just found that so beautiful. For me, it was, I think what I was seeing Acts 2 come alive. And I was seeing not just Acts 2 come alive, but I was seeing how these people refused to bow down to the gods of our age. As a result, God was using them powerfully. It was the first time I was like, wow, the Acts 2 church is actually possible. I thought it was just a theory. And it was so powerful. It ended up changing my life. Here's the thing, though. In order for you to get this, in order for this to work, in order for God's people to actually form, everyone has to do it. It's like game theory, It's like you got money and you're about to lend it, but then you're like, oh, is that other lender going to charge interest? Because if he's going to charge, then I might charge interest, right? Right? Or you see your enemy's ox in the ditch. Should I return this? Would he return mine? I don't know if he would return mine, And everyone's wondering, everyone's waiting for each other. Like, will the other person do it? And this whole thing only works if everyone does it. That's what it takes. That's what it takes to become God's people. What it takes is everyone's solidarity. Everyone committing to sacrifice together. This is why church is so hard. It's a collective action problem. Right? And then you layer that on you layer on top of that how we're all taught this hyper-individualistic attitude in our society today. It's just you should be self-sufficient. You should, take care of yourself, look out for yourself. Man, is it possible to have this kind of church? I think Nehemiah recognizes the challenge of this. And again, in verse 6, he confronts them, right? And he shows them, look at what I'm doing. I'm buying people out of slavery to bring them back to Jerusalem. And you guys are selling people. It's a strong confrontation, right, that Nehemiah has with them. I mean, it's public because everyone knows this is going on. So he pulls everyone together. And then he does this, Nehemiah's smart, right? Because he's like, return the money, you better. And they're like, okay, we'll do it. And then he goes, great. And then he calls out the priests, right? He's like, now swear in front of the priests. And then they swear. And then on top of that, he's got breadcrumbs on his shirt. And he's he unfurls them. He does this prophetic action where he says this, verse 13. He says, verse 12, I call the priests, made them swear to do as they promised. And then I also shook out the fold of my garment and said, so God may shake out every man from his house, from his labor, who does not keep his promise. So may he be shaken out empty. And I imagine with breadcrumbs, really flaky croissant-like breadcrumbs. And everyone's like, oh, And he goes, yeah, may God shake you out if you don't do this. It's a strong confrontation, right? But it says that at the end of it, all the assembly said amen and praised the Lord. And the people did as they had promised. And everyone breathes a sigh of relief and says, oh, wow, okay. Their solidarity is preserved. Their oneness is preserved. Their unity is preserved. And it's in Nehemiah 6 where the wall is finished. Right? I think in Nehemiah's response, we get the key. We get the key for how solidarity happens. He says, ought you not walk in the fear of God? And this is not I'm scared of God kind of fear of God, right? This is God at the center. I'm seeing, what God has done and how he sees the world is the most important and most relevant thing for me in my life. For the Israelites, it was, I rescued you out of slavery. So don't enslave your brothers and sisters, right? How dare you do that when you have been freed from slavery yourself? That's what fear of God means. And so, fear of God. I think that's so profound because the second world, if you think about it, there's the world, right, of God's vision, the world of making that contribution, all that stuff, and then the world of money and of practicalities and living for yourself. That second world is a godless world. When you're living in the second world, you don't think God that you're living as if God doesn't exist, right? And what Nehemiah does is he says, "Are you not walking the fear of God?" And it's like the nobles are like, "Oh my gosh, yeah, that's right." They have nothing to say when he confronts them. It's like they kind of "Oh, I think I kind of knew that, but now that you said it, I don't have anything to say." So ought you not walk in the fear of God? And then he says, to prevent the taunts of the nations of our enemies. Right? We have a mission to show people what God's ways are like, and instead they're going to taunt us. They're going to be like, "You guys can't even take care of your own people. You sell your own people into slavery." So he reminds them of the mission. He reminds them of the fear of God, and then he points to his own sacrifice. Right? He says, "I've been buying people back out of slavery." Wow, he says that, and there's this extra credibility to his confrontation, right? And so my prayer, as I end, my prayer is that we can be this kind of church for each other. That when we experience these two worlds colliding and conflicting, that we will be a church who will be able to gently, and maybe at other times more necessarily, more firmly, talk to each other and say, ought you not to walk in the fear of God? Don't you remember the mission that we have to rebuild the walls? And you know my life. You know how I live. You know the sacrifices I made to do this. Come on. And to encourage each other. I know it's scary. I know it feels like you're going to lose out. And I know it feels like it's going to cost too much. I know it feels like you're going to die. But I've been there and I've been through it. And I promise you, you will not die. You will come out more blessed. My prayer is that we would be Nehemiahs to each other. Right? And I'm encouraged. Because in the past summer that I've been here, I have seen it. I have seen us be Nehemiahs to each other. And I've been so encouraged. I've seen it in really big ways through people's financial giving and sacrifice and rising up to serve in different aspects. And I've seen it in big ways, and I've seen it in little ways. You know, just yesterday, a bunch of people came over to my house, cleaned my garage, right? And it's not just my garage. It's, you know, they weren't like washing my car. It's ministry garage. We've got a lot of ministry supplies in there and things like that. And yeah, it's just like I think if Ron wasn't there, I would have been. There was so much stuff that I was like getting stuck. And I think if Ron wasn't there, we would have it would not have been done. You know. And then later I went to Ron's place, and he's finishing up his garage of ministry stuff. And I'm like, oh man, you spent so much time at my place. Now you're doing yours, and then at the end of it, we had all this trash, and then Bo's like, I'll take it. So we loaded everything into Bo's car, and Bo just took it, right? And then even as we've been working on this space and the refresh, like, Jamie's like, someone needs to pick up cabinets. We need those cabinets. And then, like, Hardy's like, I'll do it. And Hardy, like, picked up everything, you know? There's still, like, I've been encouraged because there's real sacrifice that people are taking at this church, right? And that sacrifice is coming out of the commitment to build the church, to rebuild, it's out of a commitment to the Great Commission to save souls, right? To build a church that's going to be able to draw college students and youth to the gospel. And I've been encouraged, and I want to exhort everyone, like, let's keep doing it. Because in some sense, being the people of God is not the means to the mission. Being the people of God is the mission. Being the people of God and loving each other and sacrificing and being in solidarity with one another, like, without that, how do we even do this mission of witnessing to people about the gospel? Of telling them that we are brothers and sisters in Christ, that you can be forgiven of your sin and that you can trust in the Lord. You don't have to live for yourself. And we say all these things, and then if we don't have the people of God, the body of Christ, the community to back that up, like, that message doesn't have any power. And so being the community of God and standing in solidarity with each other as we make these sacrifices, as we commit, like, that is the mission in some sense. And so where are you on this? Right? I want to ask you, which world are you living in? I think for some of you, this year you entered the working world. You graduated college, and you're out of that bubble now. And the forces of practical realities are hitting you hard. You're like, I didn't know college was a bubble, you know. But it's hitting you hard now, and you're thinking about, yeah, you know, you have to, because you're thinking about money, you're thinking about, you know, your future and things like that. And this is the time where the rubber meets the road. This is the test. Which world will you live in? Some of you have fallen into tough situations. Maybe it's not famine, but maybe it's something like it. Health issue, you know, family troubles. And again, the forces of those practical realities, the pull of that world is strong. For some of you, it's not any particular season of life or anything. It's just more of an everyday struggle. Which world am I going to live in? I want to give you 3 things you can do. 1, voice the temptation. Voice the conflict. Tell someone. Right? Part of what happened here in Nehemiah was everything happened sort of under the radar, and then suddenly, boom, like when it finally the reckoning came out, then it all came out. And by that time, people were sold in slavery. You know? Voice the tension, voice the temptations, all that before that happens. And it's okay to be honest about it, because everyone goes through this these conflicts. Everyone goes through this struggle. Which world am I going to live in, right? Yeah, open up about it with each other. The second thing, be careful what you feed yourself. Right? Be careful what you feed yourself. You know, you get a new job, you're trying to set up your benefits. You read like Roth IRA, what is that? And you start reading about Roth IRA, and then you start reading about stocks, and you start reading about like all the financial portfolio, and you start reading, and suddenly you're like all in money, you know, and suddenly you're like, oh my gosh, if I don't have a Roth IRA, I'm gonna die, you know, and you feel that kind of panic, and then, oh man, or you're on social media, you find out some person got this resume position, or this person got a house, or whatever, and then like you're feeding yourself all these things, and suddenly you don't realize you've been feeding yourself everything from the second world, not from the world that's centered around God. Be careful what you feed yourself, right? You know, it's not a surprise that it was the wealthy. To me, it's not a surprise that it was the wealthy that exploited their fellow brothers and sisters. You know, maybe they were wealthy because they were more like inclined towards those practical realities. You know, and that's kind of, you know, how they got their wealth. But it turns out the world they lived in is a world where they didn't have brothers and sisters to take care of. And they looked at their brothers and sisters and said, you got to sell me your kid. The last thing I want to encourage us to do is to keep building up the body. Keeping the Acts 2 church together. Meet each other's needs. Love one another. Find opportunities to build one another up. To say to someone, like, you have something to do with me because you're a fellow brother or sister in Christ. Do the counterintuitive thing. Do the thing that doesn't make practical sense necessarily. Oh, you're going on an errand? I'll go with you, right? Hey, let me treat you out to this meal. Like, do things that build up those relationships, that build up the body of Christ, because what it takes for us to rebuild a generation, what it takes for us to join God in restoring what sin has ruined, is it really takes us as a people doing it. We need that strength. We need that solidarity in order to be faithful. And as we look ahead to a fall of busy ministry, like all the more, we need to keep that up. So, what does it take to rebuild? I forgot. I had pictures of my garage. Look how beautiful it is. Wow, that's amazing. What does it take to rebuild a generation ruined by sin? It takes everyone's sacrifice. God sees your sacrifice and everyone's solidarity. So, with that, let's have a time of sharing with each other. Why don't we take a minute to jot down our thoughts in response? I asked you, like, where are you on this? Which world are you living in? Where are the ways in which that's pulling at you? So kind of jot down some notes on that, give you some advice on like how you can deal with that, right? And so I want to take a minute to jot down some notes, and then we'll get into our life groups for sharing.